Okay, so today we're going to jump into some really interesting territory. You guys have been sending in these sources about this really wild idea, and the idea is that basically the New Testament, Jesus and Christianity itself, it was all kind of a Roman production, and the family that they point to is the Roman Calpurnius Piso family. So we're gonna break this down. We're gonna look at what this what they call the Piso theory is all about. And we're going to examine the evidence. We've got some stuff from somebody who's really into it. We've also got a pretty detailed critique. So we're going to kind of see what's going on with all this.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. This theory, while definitely out there, it's not entirely new. This whole idea that Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, was actually this guy Arius Calpurnius Piso. This has been around for a while. It's really popularized by this guy Abelard Reuchlin, and that's kind of a key piece of this whole Piso theory puzzle. Basically saying that history and religious beliefs were deliberately constructed on a huge scale.
Totally. And just so you know, right off the bat, this theory doesn't really have a lot of support in mainstream academia. In fact, one of the sources we were looking at even quoted a classics department member who said that, well, they basically said that websites promoting the Piso theory were like the perfect example of why you shouldn't believe everything you read online. So we're definitely going where few scholars dare to tread.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this core claim about Arius Calpurnius Piso.
Mm-hmm.
Who was this guy, and why is he so important to this theory?
Well, the theory makes him out to be like this really important figure. They say he was a Roman general. They say he led the capture of Jerusalem in 66 CE, and then he teams up with Titus to destroy the temple in 70 CE. Oh, and get this. They claim that this Arius Piso was actually Flavius Josephus, the same guy.
Okay, so right away, things get a little interesting. One of the critiques pointed out that if you search for Arius Calpurnius Piso in reliable Roman history databases or Latin study sites, there's nothing, no mention of him anywhere except on websites that are all about this Piso theory. So how could such a big figure in Roman history just disappear from, the official records? It makes you wonder if he even existed.
That's a big problem for the theory, right? If Arius Piso wasn't a real historical figure, then everything else they say about him kind of falls apart. Like, they claim he renamed Jerusalem Jupiter Capitolinum, and they even say he was the one who assassinated Emperor Vitellius.
But wait, I thought Vitellius was killed by Roman soldiers. I mean, that's what Suetonius says in his account, and he doesn't mention any Arius being involved.
Exactly. That's one of the contradictions the critique points out. And it doesn't stop there. The theory also claims that Arius Piso was right there with Titus, leading the siege of the temple in 70 CE. But if you read Josephus's account of the Jewish War, he goes into a lot of detail about the siege, but he never mentions an Arius Piso. And the Piso theory folks, they don't give any sources for where they got that information.
It's like they're adding stuff to the story that isn't really there. And in speaking of adding stuff, they've got this whole elaborate story about Julius Calpurnius Piso, who they say was Arius' son. They claim he conquered Masada sometime after 135 CE. Then, get this, he asks Emperor Hadrian to name his son as the next emperor. And when Hadrian says no, Julius supposedly kills himself. It's like a Roman soap opera. But again, where's the evidence for any of this?
It really makes you think about how important it is to have solid evidence when you're talking about history. The Piso theory wants us to believe in these, powerful Roman figures who supposedly did all these important things. But there's no real historical record of them outside of the theory itself. It's kind of like they're asking us to believe in ghosts.
Okay, so let's move on to another big part of the Piso theory, this whole idea of hidden codes and secret meanings in, ancient texts. What's that all about?
It's fascinating, really. They try to find these hidden layers by looking at the numerical value of letters and words, searching for these secret patterns and connections. For example, they make a big deal about JC being the initials of both Jesus Christ and Julius Caesar. They don't think that's just a coincidence.
And they take it way further than that. They look at Julius Caesar's name in Latin, Ivi Venus, and they focus on the IVV, which is the Roman numeral for 4. Then they say, aha, there's a hidden 44. And then there's the whole thing with Caesar's famous line, Veni, Vidi, Vici. They somehow see the number 666 in it. They say it's like vivis. It's a bit of a stretch, don't you think?
Yeah, the critique points out that there's absolutely no evidence from Roman times that anyone ever connected Veni Vidi Vici with the number 666. It's like they're seeing things that aren't really there. It's like, when you look at clouds and you see shapes, it's kind of like that, but with numbers and words.
That makes sense. They're really good at finding patterns. even if they don't mean anything. And then there's the whole thing with the Latin word pister, which means baker. They say that was like a secret code word for the Piso family.
Right, and then they use that to say that phrases like, give us this day our daily bread, are secretly about the Piso family.
It's like they think the Piso family was running a bakery on the side, and they just had to sneak it into the Bible.
And then they point out that Piso sounds kind of like the Greek word pistis, which means faith.
So they're saying that the word faith is secretly about the Piso family, too.
Basically, yeah. But, as the critique points out, words change over time, and just because two words sound similar doesn't mean they're related.
It's like saying that bat, the animal, and bat, the baseball thing, are related just because they sound the same. It doesn't really work that way.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then they bring up the King James Bible, and they say that the word fool appears exactly 66 times.
Of course they think that's intentional. They're saying that even the people who translated the King James Bible were part of this big Piso conspiracy.
A conspiracy that lasted for centuries. That's a long time to keep a secret.
The critique has a much simpler explanation. It says that the King James Bible uses the word fool to translate a bunch of different words from Hebrew and Greek. So it's not that surprising that the word fool appears a lot.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't think there's a conspiracy if the word love appeared a bunch of times, right?
Right.
Okay, so then they look at the Greek word kurios, which means Lord, and they say it's connected to the English word curious.
They're saying that was a little hint that the Piso family left in the New Testament.
A hint that they were curious about how long it would take people to figure out their secret?
Maybe, but the critique points out that curious comes from the Latin word curiosus, and it doesn't have anything to do with the Greek word kurios, so that connection doesn't really work.
Okay, so what about the Aramaic word Abba? The theory mentions Josephus using that word, and they try to tie it to Jesus.
Yeah, they're trying to say that Josephus using Abba is evidence that he was actually Aries Piso. But the critique points out that Josephus didn't use Abba in the same way that Jesus supposedly did. And actually, the New Testament doesn't even say that Jesus used Abba on the cross.
Yeah.
So that whole argument is based on, well, it's based on nothing, really.
Interesting. What about the thing with both Jesus and God calling people fools in the Gospels? The theory says that's a contradiction that was put there on purpose.
But the critique explains that the Greek text actually uses different words for fool in those passages, so it's not a contradiction. It's just, different shades of meaning that get lost in translation.
That makes sense. Okay, let's talk about some of the other things the Piso theory claims. Some of them are a bit out there, like the idea that there are hidden sexual jokes in the New Testament. And they even say that the book of Acts was a guide to Roman brothels.
Yeah, those claims don't have any evidence to back them up. It's pure speculation.
It seems like they're just making things up at that point.
And what about the whole thing with the numbered scrolls?
They say the numbered scrolls were really common in the first century. But, archaeologists found all sorts of stuff from that time period, especially in Pompeii and Herculaneum. And they haven't found any evidence of these numbered scrolls.
So how does the theory explain that? They say that the scrolls were deliberately hidden or destroyed to cover up the conspiracy. That's their go-to explanation for everything. Oh, there's no evidence. Well, that's because the Piso family hid it all.
It's convenient, but not very convincing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the person behind the Piso theory. It sounds like they have some strong opinions.
Yeah, they're very dismissive of anyone who disagrees with them. They say that critics are just not smart enough to understand the truth. It's a classic way of avoiding criticism. If you don't agree with me, you're just not smart enough.
Very mature. And they also seem to have a unique view of historical evidence.
Right. They say that the only reason there's no evidence for their theory is because the Piso family was so good at covering their tracks. So basically, the lack of evidence is proof of the conspiracy. It's circular reasoning.
So basically, they can't be wrong because they're always right.
Okay.
Sounds about right. And what do they think the point of all this is? Why go to all this trouble to create a fake religion?
They say that their work is the only way for humanity to achieve sanity. They think they're saving the world by exposing this great deception.
So they're like the prophets of truth. And they seem to be upset that the academic world isn't taking them seriously. They even call their work new classical scholarship.
Yeah, they're disappointed that they're not getting recognition. They even compare creating a website about the Piso theory to someone announcing a new theory of physics on a website. Like, those two things are the same.
That's not really how academia works.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, they don't seem too interested in engaging with mainstream scholars.
They basically ignore any criticism from established academics, and when they do address it, they just say that the critics are biased or ignorant, and sometimes they even try to distance themselves from websites that support their general ideas but maybe not their specific interpretation.
So they want to have their cake and eat it too. And how do they explain the fact that there's no historical record of Arius Piso?
They say that we're looking in the wrong place. They say that if Arius Piso was mentioned directly in the historical records, it would have blown their cover. They even use this analogy of a cow eating grass in a blank painting. You can't see the cow or the grass, but they're there. It's like they're saying, trust me, bro.
Okay, so they're basically saying that the absence of evidence is evidence. That's convenient. And what about the fact that there are no documents or records from the Piso family themselves?
They say that the Piso family destroyed all of their incriminating documents. They even say that Pliny the Elder, the guy who died in the eruption of Vesuvius, was actually on a secret mission to retrieve some of these hidden documents from a Piso villa.
But didn't Pliny the Elder go to Pompeii to study the volcano? And to help people escape?
Right, that's the accepted historical account. The Piso theory is basically twisting the story to fit their narrative. They're reading between the lines and making assumptions.
Okay, let's move on to the Piso theory's take on the papacy. They don't just think the Piso family created Christianity, they think they also created the Catholic Church.
Yeah, they say that the Calpurnius Piso family were the masterminds behind the early church. They claim they wrote all the biblical texts and the early church histories, using fake names, of course.
And they claim that Flavius Josephus, a.k.a. Arius Piso, was also St. Peter, the first pope.
Yep, that's Abelard Reuchlin's big contribution to this part of the theory.
So according to this theory, the first popes weren't actually chosen by God, they were just members of the Piso family pretending to be popes.
That's the idea. They say that the first 10 bishops of Rome were either Piso family members or people in their inner circle. They even name names. They say St. Linus was actually Pliny the Younger, St. Clement Pibot, I was Julius Calpurnius Piso, and St. Pius, I was Emperor Antoninus Pius.
Wow, that's a bold claim. And they even have an explanation for the name Peter, right?
Yeah, they say Peter comes from the Latin word pater, which means father, and they say that in this secret royal language that the Piso family used, the sounds E and A were interchangeable, so pater became papa.
So they're saying that the Pope is just the papa of the Piso family. That's wild. And they go on to identify other early Christian writers with Piso family members, right?
Yeah, they say Justus Calpurnius Piso was Justin Martyr, Flavius Arrianus was St. Telesphorus, and Silanus C. Piso was St. Hyginus. And they claim that Arius Piso and his wife Berenice moved to Athens to help their son and grandson with their writing.
And they say that all this was kept secret from the public, that an emperor was secretly the Pope.
That's right. They say the royal families that descended from the Piso clan kept everything under wraps. They controlled all the information and made sure that the common people only got the version of the story that they wanted them to hear.
That's a pretty elaborate conspiracy theory. And they even have an explanation for why Christianity didn't become the official religion of Rome until Constantine.
They say it's because the Pharisees were trying to expose the whole thing as a hoax.
The Pharisees? Weren't they, gone by then?
The theory says that the Pharisees and their descendants kept fighting against Christianity even after they were scattered.
Okay. So the Piso family created Christianity, they created the papacy, and they controlled everything from behind the scenes for centuries. And they left clues about their true identities in the New Testament.
Yep, they say the New Testament is full of hidden codes and secret meanings. They point to Revelation 13.3, for example. They say it actually means Piso is the beast in the original Greek. And they say the New Testament authors also embedded real historical information in the Bible, but it's all coded so only people in the know can understand it.
So it's like a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
And the key to solving it is figuring out all the fake names that the Piso family used.
That's what they say. They've got this whole list of aliases for Arius Piso, like Flavius Josephus, Marcus Antonius Primus, and even Jesus Christ. And they say Pliny the Younger used the names Paul and St. Ignatius. They even claim that 5 of the most important writers from that time period, Josephus, Trajan, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger, were all related.
Wow, that's quite a family reunion. And what about the fact that there are no mentions of Jesus between Josephus and Eusebius? How do they explain that gap?
They say it's because of the conflict with the Jews. And they say the Talmud, the Jewish book of law, contains information about the Piso hoax. They also reinterpret the Jewish revolts against Rome. They say those revolts were actually caused by Piso's attempts to force Christianity on the Jews, and they use Solana C. Piso's family tree to show how all these important figures were connected. It's a lot to take in.
It is. Okay, let's talk about Abelard Reuchlin, the guy who really started this whole Piso theory.
Reuchlin's book, The True Authorship of the New Testament, is kind of like the Bible for Piso theory believers. It's interesting, though, because Reuchlin wasn't originally trying to debunk Christianity. He was trying to stop Jews from converting to Christianity.
So he was trying to save the Jews from a fake religion.
That's what he thought he was doing. He believed that Christianity was a Roman invention, and he wanted to show the Jews that it wasn't part of their tradition.
That's noble, I guess. What did he actually say in his book?
He said that the whole New Testament was made up by the Calpurnius Piso family. He said they took ideas from the Jewish scriptures and created a new Jewish religion to control the Jewish people. He even said that Lucius Calpurnius Piso wrote the first version of the Gospel of Mark.
And what about Jesus? Did he think Jesus was real?
Reuchlin said Jesus was a fictional character, cobbled together from the Old Testament and pagan myths. And he said the Piso family used tons of fake names, with Flavius Josephus being one of the most important ones.
So he's saying that the Piso family basically disappeared from Roman history after Nero, and then they reappeared using these fake names to write the New Testament.
Exactly. And he said the Jews knew that Christianity was a hoax because they knew that Piso was the one who destroyed their temple and their city.
So they saw right through it.
That's what Reuchlin believed. He even tied the destruction of Masada into the Piso theory. He said the 960 suicides at Masada were a coded message about Christ, the cross, and Calpurnius Piso.
Wow, they really see codes everywhere, don't they? And who did Reuchlin say were the main authors of the New Testament?
He said it was Arius Calpurnius Piso, disguised as Josephus, his son Fabius Justus, Pliny the Younger, who was married to Piso's granddaughter, and his son Julius. And he went into a lot of detail about all the numerical codes that the Piso family supposedly used to hide their identities.
Numbers again. What kind of codes are we talking about?
Well, Reuchlin said that certain numbers had special meanings. He pointed to numbers like 14, 19, 24, 27, 30, 36, 41, 44, 46, 60, 66, 67, 70, 80, 87, 96, 146, 144, 180, 200, 300, 316, and of course, 666. He said all of these numbers had secret meanings related to the Piso family or important events, and he even thought that the Jews would have recognized these codes and understood what they meant.
So they were waging a secret war of numbers. What else did they use besides numbers?
Reuchlin said they also used certain sounds like purr, paz, sure, and shy, and they used animals like leopards, panthers, and horses, and they even used references to mythological figures like Minos.
It's like they were trying to create the most complicated secret code ever. And what about the number 666? What did Reuchlin say about that?
He said that Julius Piso, who was mad because his grandson wasn't going to be the next emperor, wrote the Book of Revelation as revenge. He basically turned the Piso family's own secret code against them. And he used the number 666 to represent his father, Arius Piso, and Jesus.
So 666 is the Piso family's secret code for evil.
Interesting. And did Reuchlin think that everyone knew about this secret?
No, he said it was only known by a small group of people, like religious leaders, politicians, and important writers. He called them the inner circle. And he said they used this secret knowledge to control the masses.
A secret society controlling the world. That's pretty standard conspiracy theory stuff. And did he think that anyone outside the inner circle ever figured it out?
He said there were coded responses to the Piso hoax hidden in Jewish writings and rituals. And he thought that you could see hints of this great secret in later literature and historical events.
So he thought the secret was still alive, even centuries later. Wow, this Piso theory is really something.
It is. So to wrap things up, we've spent some time looking at the Piso theory. It's this idea that the New Testament, Jesus, and Christianity were all invented by the Roman Calpurnius Piso family. They claim that this one guy, Arius Piso, who may not have even existed, was the mastermind behind it all. And they say that they used a bunch of codes and fake names to hide their true identities.
Right. And as we've discussed, there are a lot of problems with this theory. There's no real evidence to support any of it. The numerological interpretations are very speculative, and the whole idea that they could have kept the secret for so long is, well, it's pretty far-fetched.
Yeah, the lack of evidence is a big problem. But regardless of whether you believe it or not, the Piso theory makes you think. It makes you think about how we interpret history, how we form our beliefs, and whether there are hidden narratives that we're not seeing. It's like the theorist said, we might all be living under some kind of illusion. It's a thought-provoking idea, even if it's not true.
Definitely. It highlights the importance of critical thinking and examining evidence.
Exactly. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the bizarre world of the Piso theory. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep asking questions.
This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.